I covered my brother's rent for 2 years so he could focus on his music. I paid my parents' car insurance when their policy lapsed. I sent money home every month, quietly, without being asked, because asking felt like failing. And the night I finally had something worth celebrating, the night I passed my CPA exam after 3 failed attempts and 4 years of studying through double shifts, not one of them showed up. "We figured you'd be fine without us," my dad said when he called the next morning, unbothered, half distracted by whatever was playing on television behind him. "You always are." I didn't say anything. I just walked to my laptop, sat down, and started typing. By the end of the week, everything had changed. People always say you can't choose your family. I spent most of my life believing that meant you had to keep them. No matter what, no matter how much it cost you. No matter how many times they cashed the check you handed them and then acted like you'd handed them a burden. I grew up the middle child, which sounds neutral, but wasn't. My older sister was 7 years ahead of me and mostly out of the house by the time I started paying attention to the way things worked. My brother was 4 years younger and arrived into the family like a light turning on in a room that had been dim for years. My parents didn't throw a party or anything dramatic. They just reorganized around him. The house rearranged itself. The calendar rearranged itself. Even the dinner conversation rearranged itself. He was funny and easy and effortlessly likable in the way that some people just are, and my parents responded to him the way plants respond to sunlight. They turned toward him without even noticing they were doing it. I wasn't like him. I was quieter, more serious, the kind of kid who stayed up late finishing extra credit nobody asked for and cried in the car after report cards, not because the grades were bad, but because no matter how good they were, the reaction at home was always the same gentle shrug. My mom would say, "Well, you've always been the responsible one." Like that was a compliment. Like being responsible wasn't just code for "we expect this from you" and nothing more. My dad coached my brother's little league team. He drove 2 hours to every one of my brother's high school baseball games. He once left a birthday dinner early, my birthday dinner, because my brother's practice ran long and someone needed to pick him up. I watched him put on his jacket and kiss my mom on the cheek and wave at me from across the table like he was just stepping out for air. He wasn't back by the time I blew out the candles. I don't think he remembers it. I think for him it was just a Tuesday. When I was 17, I started working. Not the casual weekend job kind. The open before school, close on weekends, deposit half the paycheck directly into a savings account kind. I told myself it was for college. It was also for the quiet power of having money that was mine, that no one had given me, that no one could take away. My first real paycheck felt like proof of something I couldn't name yet. My brother didn't work in high school. He didn't need to. My parents covered his gas, his dates, his gear. When he needed new cleats, there was money. When I needed textbooks, I bought used ones 3 editions out of date and filled the margins with corrections. I didn't resent him for it exactly, not then. I just noticed. I filed it away, the way I filed away everything, quietly, without making a scene. College was the first real test. I got into a good school 2 states away, accepted, partial scholarship, but I would need loans for the rest. My parents sat me down and said they were proud of me, really proud. But money was tight. They couldn't contribute much. Maybe a few hundred for supplies. I nodded. I said I understood. I signed the loan paperwork myself, at 18, in a financial aid office that smelled like stale coffee. And I felt something settle in me then, something that felt less like disappointment and more like clarity. I was going to do this on my own. That was fine. I could do that. 2 years later, my brother applied to college. A state school, good program, out-of-state tuition, and somehow money was not tight anymore. My dad called to tell me, excited, talking about how they were going to make it work, how my brother deserved this shot. He mentioned a second mortgage on the house. He mentioned some savings they'd tucked away. I listened on my end of the phone and said, "That's great, really great," and stared at the wall of my dorm room for a while after we hung up. I graduated in 4 years. No ceremony attendance, they couldn't make the drive. But they drove 11 hours to move my brother into his dorm the following August. I know because my mom texted me a photo of him standing in front of his building with a big cardboard box under his arm, grinning. She said, So excited for this new chapter. I liked the photo and put my phone face down. After graduation, I moved back to the area, got my first real accounting job, started working toward my CPA license. It's not a casual certification. It's 4 separate exams, hundreds of hours of study, an experience requirement, a timeline that stretches out over years while regular life keeps happening around it. Most people fail at least one section. I failed 3 in the first attempt, 2 in the second. I kept going. I worked full days and studied at night and kept a notebook of mistakes I was not going to make again. I also, without really planning to, became the family's financial cushion. It started small. My parents' furnace broke one winter, and they were short. I covered it. My brother moved into his first apartment after graduation and needed first and last month's rent. I lent it. He never mentioned paying it back. Then their car insurance lapsed because of a billing mistake, they said, and could I just spot them until they sorted it out? I spotted them. Then my brother's music equipment got stolen, and he needed a replacement interface and microphone to keep the gigs coming in, except the gigs weren't really coming in, and hadn't been for a while, and what he needed was the equipment, and also somehow the rent again, because he'd had a slow month. I want to be clear that I was not doing any of this while being thanked. I was doing it while being referred to as the practical one, the steady one, the one who had her act together, in a tone that made it sound like those were things that just happened to me rather than things I had worked very hard to become. There's a specific kind of invisible that comes from being reliable. People stop seeing you as a person and start seeing you as a function, a bridge they cross without thinking about who built it. My closest friend through all of this was a woman I met in my first office job, a few years older than me, sharp and funny, and unfailingly honest in the way that only people who have been through real things can be. She had grown up in a complicated family of her own, and we understood each other in the shorthand way that doesn't require much explaining. She knew about my brother, my parents, the monthly transfers that weren't loans anymore because we all understood they were never coming back. She never told me what to do. She just listened and sometimes raised one eyebrow very slightly, the way people do when they want you to hear yourself. 3 years after I started seriously studying for the CPA exam, I passed. All 4 sections. The last one came through on a Thursday evening in October, and I was sitting in my car in the parking garage at work because I'd checked the score release portal approximately 40 times that day, and I didn't want to be at my desk when the result came in. I refreshed the page one more time and sat very still for a second, and then I screamed in my car, alone, in a concrete parking structure, for about 10 seconds straight. Then I called my friend, who screamed too, and then I cried a little, and then I called my parents. My mom said, "Oh, honey, that's wonderful." There was a pause. My dad got on and said, "See, I knew you'd get it eventually." They moved on pretty quickly to asking if I'd talked to my brother lately, because he was going through a rough patch with the music thing, and could I maybe reach out. I said I would. I didn't call my brother that night. I sat with my own news a little longer. I had earned that. I decided to plan a dinner. Not a big production, just a nice restaurant, a reservation, a chance to sit together and mark the moment. I picked a place about halfway between my apartment and my parents' house, a 40-minute drive for them, nothing unreasonable. My brother lived about an hour and a half away by then. I offered to cover everyone's meal. I made the reservation for a Saturday in November, sent the details 3 weeks in advance, confirmed twice. My parents said they'd be there. My brother said, yeah, definitely, for sure. I got to the restaurant early. I'd worn a dress I'd been saving for something worth dressing up for, and I sat at the reserved table and ordered water and watched the door. At 6:30, no one had arrived. I texted. At 6:50, I called. My brother's phone went to voicemail. My dad answered on the 3rd try. He sounded genuinely surprised that I was calling, like the dinner was a distant memory, something from a previous season of a show he'd stopped following. "Oh, yeah, about that." He paused. "Your brother had his friend's band thing tonight, over in the city. You know how it is. It's hard to say no. We didn't want to go without him. It felt weird. You understand." I looked across the restaurant at a family 2 tables over. A woman maybe 10 years older than me, her husband, what looked like her parents, all of them leaning over something on the table together, laughing. "You understand. Not, we're so sorry. Not, we made a mistake. Just, you understand, tossed out like a receipt. My mom took the phone then. I heard her voice come on, softer, doing the work of smoothing. We thought about it, but the drive was a lot and your brother had already committed, and we really thought you could just celebrate with your friends. You have good friends. You don't really need us there. In the background, I heard my brother's voice. He was already there. He was at my parents' house. He hadn't gone to the city yet. He was just there, probably on the couch, and they had all decided together that they didn't need to come. I said, okay. I said I'd talk to them later. I set my phone face down on the white tablecloth and looked at the bread basket and sat with that for about 30 seconds. Then I texted my friend. She asked where I was. I told her. She said I'll be there in 25 minutes, and she was. She brought her husband, who is one of those quietly excellent people who doesn't make a fuss but always does the right thing, and the three of us sat at that table and ordered everything I had originally intended to share with my family, and we talked until the restaurant started stacking chairs around us. She ordered a cake from the dessert menu and made the waiter bring it out while she sang, badly, the full version of a congratulations song she made up on the spot, and her husband gave a very short, very sincere toast that made me laugh, and then made me cry a little, which she pretended not to notice so I could pretend it hadn't happened. That night, after I got home, I sat at my desk for a long time in the quiet. I opened my laptop. My husband, we'd been together 5 years by then, and married for 2, came into the room and leaned in the doorway. He knew what had happened. He had been texting me through the evening. He looked at me now with the specific expression he gets when he's about to ask me if I'm sure, because he knows I've already decided. Are you sure? He said. I told him I was. He came and stood behind me for a moment, looking at the screen. Then he kissed the top of my head and went to make tea, and I started writing. I want to explain what it was I sent, because it matters, and because people always assume revenge is loud. Mine wasn't loud, it was just accurate. My brother had been receiving money from my parents for years beyond what made sense, even given the music career that wasn't quite a career. What I had found out gradually, through the careless way our family handled financial information around me, because they assumed I would handle it quietly and that I would not look too closely, was that he had told my parents he needed money for a recording studio session, for gear, for a van, for the band. They had given it. Some of it had come indirectly from me, from the household support I provided, and a significant portion of it had gone somewhere that was not recording equipment and was not a van. I had documentation. I had bank statements. I had receipts he had forwarded to my parents for reimbursement that I had seen because they asked me to look them over, and I had matched those numbers to accounts that didn't add up. I wrote a very calm, very detailed, very organized email to my parents. I laid out exactly what I knew, with the documentation attached. I explained exactly what had been misrepresented and when. I explained what I had contributed over the years and how some of that contribution had been redirected without my knowledge. I was not cruel. I did not exaggerate. I simply told the truth in the same organized, precise way I had spent my entire career learning to present financial information. And then I wrote a second email, shorter, and I sent it to myself. A list of everything I was going to stop. The automatic transfers. The emergency buffer I had created in a shared account my parents had access to. The cosigner status on my brother's car note that I had agreed to 2 years ago and forgotten to revisit. The informal arrangement where I covered certain annual expenses because it was easier than the argument that came if I didn't. I stopped all of it. Not dramatically. Not with a phone call or a confrontation. I just went through my financial accounts one by one and I removed myself. The way you might cancel a subscription you stopped using months ago and just forgot about. My husband brought me tea and sat in the other chair, and we didn't talk much, just sat in the same room while I finished. When I was done, he said, "You know tomorrow is going to be interesting." I said, "I know." He said, "For the record, they were wrong tonight." I said, "I know that too." He reached over and put his hand briefly on mine, and then we went to bed. I woke up to 11 missed calls, 7 from my parents' home number, 3 from my mom's cell, 1 from my brother, a string of texts that started confused and escalated quickly, the kind of messages that arrive in stages as the sender gets less patient with the absence of a response. I made coffee first. I read through them over the kitchen table in the early gray morning light while my husband slept. The general shape of them was this: what did you send? Why did you send it? You had no right. This is a family matter. Your brother is devastated. You need to call right now. We need to talk about this. Call us. I did not call. Over the next week, information came to me in fragments, mostly through my older sister, who had largely stayed out of the family dynamics, but who was now relaying things with the careful neutrality of a journalist covering a war she didn't start. My brother, when confronted by my parents about the documentation I'd sent, had not been able to explain it. There had been a very bad few days. Some version of an accounting had been demanded. Some version of a reckoning had apparently occurred, though she couldn't tell me all the details, only that it had been significant and that the air in my parents' house was, in her words, like a gas leak nobody wanted to light a match near. My parents, I understood through her, had been more financially dependent on the informal structure I'd built around them than they had ever acknowledged out loud. The car they drove had my name attached to it in a way that now mattered. The shortfalls I had quietly covered had not been shortfalls at all, it turned out. They had been load-bearing walls, and I had removed them, quietly, over the course of a single evening. My brother called twice more that week. I did not answer. He texted something long that I read once and did not respond to. It was the kind of message that is mostly about his feelings and contains no acknowledgement of mine, the kind that ends with something like, I hope we can move past this because ultimately family is what matters. I put my phone in a drawer and went for a walk. What I want to say about that walk is that I expected to feel worse. I expected the guilt to arrive like weather, fast and heavy and impossible to ignore. I had spent so many years arranging my financial life around the comfort of people who did not arrange their emotional lives around me, and I had always assumed that the guilt was load-bearing too, that if I removed it, something in me would collapse. Instead, I felt something I can only describe as structural. Like the scaffolding I'd been bracing against wasn't holding me up, it was just holding me in place. And now I was standing on my own, and the building was fine. I still had moments. I won't pretend otherwise. There was an evening a few weeks later when I was in a grocery store, and I passed the bakery section and saw those small, decorated cakes, the kind my mom used to order for birthdays when I was little, before the budget shifted and before the birthday that got more or less handled and the one that didn't. I stood in that aisle for probably too long, holding a bag of oranges, feeling something old and tired move through me. Not regret exactly. More like grief for the version of the family I had kept hoping we might somehow still become. But grief is not the same as being wrong. My friend called one evening in December and we talked for 2 hours about everything and nothing, the way people do when they've known each other long enough that the conversation is really just company. At one point she said, "You know what I've noticed about you lately?" She paused. "You sound like yourself." I asked her what I sounded like before. She laughed quietly. "Like someone translating herself in real time," she said. "Always just slightly edited." She wasn't wrong. I started making different choices in the months after. Small ones mostly. I stopped carrying my phone on the highest volume setting because I was always braced for an emergency call. I started cooking on weeknights instead of eating at my desk. I signed up for a weekend ceramics class, which I was terrible at, and which I loved in a way I could not entirely explain. My husband started making small comments about cities we hadn't visited yet, weekend trips that didn't need to be justified or scheduled around other people's timelines. We went to one and had a very ordinary, very good 2 days, and drove home talking about where we'd go next. My parents did reach out eventually, not right away, and not easily. My mom sent a letter, an actual physical letter, which was either very sincere or very calculated, and I read it twice and set it on the kitchen counter and looked at it for several days. It wasn't an apology exactly. It was more of a gesture in the direction of one, a hand reaching out without quite knowing what it was reaching for. My dad called once and was gruffer, less processed, the kind of conversation where someone says things like, "I didn't realize and I didn't mean for it to," and trails off before finishing the sentence. I stayed on the line. I didn't fill the silence for him. I told them both, clearly, what I was and wasn't willing to continue. Not in an angry way, just in a true way, the way you finally describe something you have understood for a long time but needed the right moment to say out loud. I said I loved them. I said I wanted a relationship with them. I said the relationship I had been in was not one I was returning to. I said I would be happy to build something different if they were willing to start from an honest place. I haven't heard from my brother since the third week. I'm told through my sister that he moved in with a friend, that the car situation resolved in a way that cost money, that he is doing okay, which means different things from different mouths. I don't wish him badly. I just don't particularly need to know. In January, I found out I was pregnant. I sat on the edge of the bathtub in the small white light of early morning and held the test in both hands and felt my whole body go very quiet, the way it does before something large settles into place. When I told my husband, he sat down on the bathroom floor, right there on the tile, and pulled me down next to him, and we sat there together for probably 10 minutes, not saying much, just existing in the fact of it. He kept saying okay in this voice that meant everything. We told my friend first. She showed up 2 days later with a plant and a bottle of sparkling cider and the most aggressively cheerful card I have ever seen in my life, and we sat at the kitchen table and talked about names and logistics and the terrifying ordinary miracle of it, and she cried a little, which she blamed on the cider, which was not cider related. I haven't told my parents yet. Not because I won't, but because some news needs to be given at the right time to people who are ready to receive it. We're still in the early process of building something different, and I want to be sure the foundation is real before I hand them something that precious. I think about the girl I was in that restaurant, sitting at a table set for 4 with a glass of water and a dress I'd saved for an occasion I was the only one who showed up for. I think about her looking at the door for 20 minutes, cutting her steak into smaller and smaller pieces just to have something to do with her hands. I don't feel sorry for her anymore. I feel something closer to tenderness. She was still waiting for the family she deserved to realize what they had. She hadn't understood yet that waiting isn't the same as earning it, and that the right people don't need to be convinced. My friend was there in 25 minutes. She sang a made-up song over a restaurant cake and made me cry in the best way. She showed up without being asked, without being paid, without a second thought. That's the part they never calculate. All those years of being the responsible one, the steady one, the one who just handles it, they saw it as a resource, a thing to draw from. They didn't understand that it was a person, that the person was paying attention, that the person had kept very careful records. Some nights I sit at that same desk by the window, the one where I wrote the email that changed everything, and I work on something ordinary. A file for a client, a grocery list, notes from the ceramics class, which I am still bad at and still love. My husband moves around in the kitchen behind me, making dinner sounds, the comfortable noise of a life being lived. The baby is small still, a secret the world doesn't know yet, a whole future tucked neatly inside an ordinary Tuesday. I used to think being the one who handles things was my role, fixed, written in. Now I understand it was just the part I'd been playing the longest. I closed that laptop. I walked away from that table. And for the first time in 31 years, I stopped waiting for someone to hand me permission to take up space. I don't need their blessing. I never did. I just had to finally believe that for myself. So let me ask you this, because I've been thinking about it a lot lately, and I'd really like to know what you think. If the people who were supposed to show up for you never do, at what point does loyalty become a habit you just haven't broken yet? Leave me your answer below. And if this story felt familiar in any way at all, hit subscribe, because there are more of these. There are always more of these. And you should not have to feel alone in them.